Hello, Year 2, how are you? And welcome to today's history lesson. Now, in our history lesson last week, we looked at Florence Nightingale's journey to Scutari in Turkey and how she helped the hospital there during the Crimean War. Well, today we're going to be looking at the question of how Florence Nightingale helped improve modern medicine. So, how did she have an impact on the medicine and the hospitals that we have today? So by the end of the lesson, you will be able to give me even more information about why Florence Nightingale was famous, what made her famous, and you'll also be able to understand how people from the past, like Florence Nightingale, can have such a big impact on society today. So how Florence Nightingale had an impact on our hospitals and on our medicine. Now, before we do that, I'd like to see how much you can remember from last lesson. So here is your retrieval question for today. What differences can you see between the pictures? Now, these are the two pictures that we looked at last lesson. There's the picture before Florence Nightingale arrived in Scutari and the picture of the hospital after Florence Nightingale has helped. And I would like you to spot 4 differences between the pictures. So could you pause the video now and have a think, what differences can you see? Okay, Year 2, so let's have a look what I found. You may have spotted different differences and that's fine, but let's have a look at some that we could say for these pictures. So you could mention the amount of people. So in the first picture, you can see that there are a lot of people and they're all on the floor and there's not much space at all to move around, is there? Which isn't very hygienic. Then in the second picture, there's a lot more space, isn't there? The beds are nicely separated. There's lots of room to move around. And that just makes the whole place a lot cleaner, doesn't it? A lot more hygienic. Everybody is not on top of each other, like in the first picture. You could have also talked about the conditions. So yes, as we know, in the first picture, there were very dirty conditions. There were lots of rats on the floor and it wasn't a very clean place at all. But in the second picture, Florence Nightingale helped to improve the hygiene of the hospitals and it's a lot cleaner place. Because remember in the first picture, they didn't even clean the wounds of the soldiers, which helped to spread infection quickly. Whereas in the second picture, Florence Nightingale made sure that the wounds were cleaned with clean cloths so that infection wasn't spread. You could have also mentioned the clothing. So like the blankets, remember they had dirty blankets in the first picture and clean blankets in the second picture. The clothing was also dirty in the first picture. Remember, they were still in the clothes that they wore during the Crimean War, which were all bloody and they were all dirty, which wasn't very hygienic at all. Whereas in the second picture, Florence Nightingale made sure that everybody had clean clothes to wear. You could have also mentioned the equipment. So in the first picture, I can only see 2 beds, whereas in the second picture, there are lots of beds, probably one for each patient. And in the first picture, they only had 1 chamber pot for everybody. But remember, I spotted the chamber pot under the bed in the second picture, sorry. And that probably means that they had a chamber pot each. And Florence Nightingale introduced toilets into hospitals, didn't she? So there's another difference. And finally, you could have spoken about the medical supplies. So I know we spoke about them not cleaning the wounds in the first picture and cleaning them in the second. But in the second picture, can you see that there is a cabinet with lots of medical supplies in, which Florence Nightingale introduced to help improve the hygiene of the hospitals, to help all the patients. So fantastic, well done if you were able to spot some differences between the 2 pictures. That's fantastic. And if you were able to spot other differences to what I spotted, that is also brilliant. Well done for remembering all of that information. Now let's move on to today's learning. So as we know, Florence Nightingale was in the hospital in Scutari. Well, she returned to Britain in 1856. And when she returned to Britain, she found lots of different newspaper articles written about her. Can you see the one on the left, the Illustrated London News? Well, that describes her return to England after the war. Now, why do you think newspaper articles were written about Florence Nightingale? Can you pause the video and have a think for me? Okay, Year 2, so why do you think that newspaper articles were written about Florence Nightingale? Well, it's because people thought that she was an expert on nursing, which she was. She helped to improve the hygiene of the hospital in Scutari. So she was very knowledgeable about nursing and people were very impressed with everything that she'd done to help the wounded soldiers in Scutari. Now, the knowledge she had gained during her time in the Crimean War had reduced death rate. So that means that there were less people dying. Because can you remember, before Florence Nightingale arrived, lots and lots and lots of people were dying in the hospitals because of the conditions, because of disease. Whereas after, less and less people were dying. And although she believed in the theory of miasma, which is about diseases which are caused by bad air, so dirty air, it helped her beliefs of making hospitals more hygienic. So all of her beliefs about the theory of miasma and bad air helped her to think of all the different ways that she could improve the hospitals hygienically, okay? And therefore, infection reduced because of all these brilliant ways that she had thought of to make the hospitals cleaner. And once Florence Nightingale's methods had started being used, the death rates decreased. Lots of less people were dying, sorry. Okay, so in 1859, Florence Nightingale published a book called Notes on Nursing. Now, what do you think this book might have been about? Yes, you're right, it gave advice on lots of different things to do with nursing. And you can still buy this book today, and lots of doctors and nurses still use it. And it covered topics such as cleanliness, food, so what food different people should be eating in hospitals, hospital management, so how hospitals were run, and beds and bedding, because remember, Florence Nightingale introduced a bed and beds in the hospital in Scutari, and she also made sure that the bedding was clean, because before she arrived, it wasn't clean, was it? Now, what does it mean by cleanliness? Do you know? What is cleanliness? Well, let's find out together. Cleanliness is a noun, and it describes how clean a place or a person is. And it has 3 syllables. Oh, we haven't had 3 syllables before. Shall we clap along together? 3, 2, 1, cleanliness. There we go. And a synonym for cleanliness is hygiene. Remember the word that we learnt last week? So there we go. We have 2 words that mean the same thing, cleanliness and hygiene. So it means how clean a place or a person is. And Florence Nightingale wrote about cleanliness in her book. Now, Florence Nightingale influenced people with her book even outside of Britain, and her book was translated into 11 languages, and lots of people wanted to follow in her footsteps. So lots of people wanted to do the same as what she'd done. Now, what does it mean that she influenced people abroad? She influenced people, and that's why her book was in 11 languages. What does the verb influence mean? Do you know? Well, let's find out together again. So influence is a verb, and it means to have an effect on someone or something. And again, it has 3 syllables. Would you like to clap them again with me? 3, 2, 1. Influence. There we go. We're learning lots of long words today. And some synonyms for that are effect and impact. So Florence Nightingale's work was having an impact even in other countries. So Florence Nightingale also influenced people abroad. Now, in 1860, Florence Nightingale also established, so she set up the Nightingale Training School for Nurses at St Thomas's Hospital in London. And its reputation spread until Nightingale nurses, so all of the nurses that Florence Nightingale had trained up, were asked to start new schools all over the world to train nurses. They were asked to start schools in Africa, in Australia, in America. Now, how did Florence Nightingale, with her Nightingale School of Nurses, help change the thoughts behind what rich women should do, what rich girls should be doing? Because remember, people used to think that rich girls should be staying at home and looking after the houses and not going out to work. Well, how did Florence Nightingale help change that view and also change the view on nurses? Well, before Florence Nightingale, nursing was considered unimportant and a very low status job. So people with low status did nursing, and there was no formal training. So there's no training to become a nurse because it was so unpopular, because people thought it was such an unimportant job. And there were few women doctors because people thought that women weren't as clever as men, and they were expected to stay at home, like I said, to look after the house and the family. Whereas after Florence Nightingale, after she'd been to Scutari and made such a big impact, she made it acceptable to train as a nurse. And now it was thought of as a respected and appreciated job. So people respected nurses and they appreciated the work that nurses did. Now, I have told you a lot of information there, I know. And remember, over the last 2 lessons, we've been making a timeline. This was the timeline we made in our first lesson, and then we carried on our timeline in the second lesson, and we got as far as they arrived at Scutari. Now, I've just given you 3 new dates. 1856, Florence returned to Britain. 1860, the Nightingale Training School for Nurses was established, so was set up. And in 1859, Florence wrote Notes on Nursing. Now, we need to add these 3 dates to our timeline. So the last date that we have on our timeline is the 3rd of November, 1854. So is it going to be 1856, 1860, or 1859? Could you pause the video? And if you have your timeline that you've made over the last few lessons handy, if you know where it is, could you go and get it and add these 3 dates on in the correct order? Pause the video now and have a go. Okay, year 2, so let's have a look. So our last date was 1854. Now, which date is next? 1856, 1860, or 1859? Yes, brilliant. It's 1856. Florence returned to Britain. What's the date after that? 1856, and then, yes, 1859. Florence wrote Notes on Nursing. She wrote her book, and remember, it was published in 11 different languages because she had an impact even in countries abroad. And then the last one must be in 1860. The Nightingale Training School for Nurses was established or set up. So there we go. We've got a timeline of Florence Nightingale all the way from when she was born to when she set up the Nightingale Training School for Nurses. And next lesson, maybe we'll add even more dates to this timeline. Who knows? But look at that brilliant timeline that we've created over these last 3 lessons.